Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole. The state of our planet has never been more in the spotlight, with not one, but two key international conferences in 2020. So this week, we're looking back at what we've learned and how the world is trying to turn things around for the better. The long-delayed COP15 Biodiversity Summit was the largest of its kind for more than a decade when it finally took place, virtually, in October. Key figures are expected to continue the conversation in person in Kunming in April. And with more than a quarter of all species in danger of extinction, a further delay could have disastrous consequences. Elizabeth Mrema, who leads the UN Convention on Biodiversity, told me why summits like COP15 are so vital for the planet's green future.
Personally, what I want to see coming out of Kunming, one, there will be a Kunming declaration, and within the declaration is again the underlining political commitment on the importance of biodiversity and the need for the global community to take actions to hold and reverse biodiversity loss. So we hope these commitments will enable the world to lead us to the next part of the Conference of the Parties, which will then adopt that 10-year and long-term framework on post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So getting that, again, commitment in support of biodiversity agenda will be my key expectation. And also we hope that declaration will recognize the importance of biodiversity in human health and mainstreaming biodiversity in decision-making. So all this then will revamp that commitment in support of the biodiversity agenda.
And what has been achieved since 2018?
Since 2018, you know, we expected the COP to meet after 2 years, which would have been last year in May. And the main work of the convention had been now, one was to take stock of what has been achieved in the last 10 years in terms of implementation of our strategic plan for biodiversity and the 20 Aichi biodiversity target. And that led us to produce a major report on the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5th edition, which unfortunately concluded that none of the 20 Aichi biodiversity targets were met, although about 6 of them, only partial progress had been made. And actually some of them even went backwards instead of forward. So that had been the measure. And it is the result of this outcome in this report which is informing the development of the new framework.
From COP15 to COP26, the UN Climate Conference finally took place in Scotland with high expectations after a year-long delay because of the pandemic. One outcome was the Glasgow Climate Pact, which committed to increasing finance for adaptation and requesting countries to present more ambitious climate pledges in 2022. An initiative launched by Costa Rica and Denmark was the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance to bring countries together to prepare for a post-fossil fuel world. I spoke to Denmark's Climate Energy Minister Dan Jorgensen to ask how Denmark is hoping to lead the world into a more climate-friendly future.
It is a hard economic sale, and it is obviously also extra hard for countries that have very, very big earnings on oil and gas. On the other hand, if you look at where international energy policy is moving right now, it's clear that investments in renewables are becoming cheaper and cheaper. It's clear that decisions that are being made in national governments, but also in the EU, for instance, the decision just put forward by the European Commission to propose that we ban all new internal combustion engine cars from 2035 all of these decisions point in one direction, which is a fossil-free future. And if you think about it, most countries now have decided that they want to be net zero countries in 2050, which is great because that's what we need. But does it really make sense to say on one hand that you want to be net zero, but on the other hand that you want to continue selling oil and gas to others? I don't think it does. So I think these countries, even though I acknowledge it's a difficult decision for them, need to start having that conversation with themselves and their citizens.
That was Denmark's Climate and Energy Minister, Dan Jorgensen. Of course, convincing wealthy countries to give up fossil fuels is one thing. Convincing them to pledge more to help poorer parts of the world is another. It's proving challenging. The $100 billion promise to help less wealthy countries adapt to the effects of climate change, made 12 years ago in Copenhagen, have been broken. Well, I spoke to Roberto Cingolani, Italy's Minister for Ecological Transition, about the successes and the failures of COP26.
To be honest, I understood that this was the best that could have been done. But in general, if I stay in the socks of the vulnerable countries, I am sure that they are not satisfied. We didn't succeed in getting the 100 billion contribution. We didn't succeed in mobilizing more money. There is a general statement about the fact that we have to increase our effort as advanced countries. But, well, you know, facts should follow the statements and the rules. And finally, I think some important differences emerged in the comparison, in the discussion. And I understand the instances of China, of India, and other big countries having a fossil fuel manufacturing that is more recent than the one we had in Europe, for instance. So there is a different need of time for different countries. This is very difficult to combine, I understand, but I also understand that it's a realistic problem. We have to face it, and we have to discuss how to make it in the future.
You've mentioned China and India, and as you know, the big issue was fossil fuels, and especially coal. Although the language was watered down, this was the first COP, I think, to make specific decisions on coal and fossil fuels. So would you say that was at least something of a breakthrough?
Sure. You know, I'm a physicist. What is important is not the instantaneous speed, but it's the average speed. We all agreed that we have to go to 1.5 by, let's say, mid-century, even though the date is not yet fixed, but around mid-century. That means that we can achieve this result with different speeds. Maybe somebody will be slower at the beginning, somebody will be faster. Italy can be faster because we have already a background in decarbonization. Some other countries, especially the very big countries, might need more time at the very beginning. But what is important is that we land at 1.5 in due time altogether. So I want to see the half glass full, and I think it's very important that everybody agreed on 1.5. And even though we had to smooth a little bit from phase out to phase down, I'm confident that we all agree that by the mid-century, around mid-century, we have to be at 1.5. So what is important is the pathway to reach 1.5.
In order for us to meet climate and carbon targets after COP26, governments, scientists and individuals will all need to work together to change how we live our lives for the better. Research and innovation are both key to that success, and it's vital that the very latest information is acceptable to all. One man tasked with doing just that across Europe is Jean-Éric Paquet, the Director General of Research and Innovation at the European Commission. And I asked him exactly how they're leading the way to a greener, more sustainable future.
You will not be surprised to hear that in Europe, many of the startups which are aiming to scale up, in fact, are linked to science and to deep tech, but also to provide innovative, disruptive solutions dealing precisely with climate change mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity, environment. And we have more and more of solutions coming in renewable energies, in clean aviation, but also in plant gene editing, for example, which stem from these startups, which we help them to grow. So these are two important components. We have also set up a number of partnerships, particularly important partnerships with industry, in steel, in aviation, in the construction sector, where we are working with industry to refine, pilot, demonstrate the technologies needed for our heavy industries to move towards a low carbon and zero carbon production pathway. And this will produce results in the medium and longer term. But what is particularly important for that research program is that it is set up to invent and find the technologies of tomorrow, but it is also geared at ensuring that the existing technologies can be scaled up and deployed in a fast manner, so that by 2030, which is this intermediate goal set by the European Union Green Deal, we effectively reduce already by 55% our CO2 emissions.
At COP26 in Glasgow in November, sustainability was one of the key words on everyone's lips. To find out what that really means in practice, we spoke to the heads of sustainability at three major organisations: healthcare and agricultural giant Bayer International, British Airways, and the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. And here's what they had to say. Matthias, can you tell us more about how you've changed your production methods to meet your sustainability goals?
I think the most important thing all companies need to do is they need to reduce their carbon emissions by betting on renewable energy. And that is something we have done. We can see significant reductions in our carbon emissions by relying on those renewable sources. Secondly, you need to look at where carbon is not part of your energy or heat source, but really linked to the way you produce certain chemicals or certain other products. That's far harder and requires a lot of innovation and investment. And then the third thing is you need to leverage new technologies that are emerging. What we have seen with vaccines are a technology that came from the confluence of genomics, artificial intelligence, and new frontier chemistry, is something we can also utilize in the fight against climate change. So we are in an age of biology, and looking at the possibilities that come with that is front and center for us.
Well, whatever we're talking about in terms of sustainability, your goal at Bayer is a very ambitious one. You intend to be carbon neutral in less than 9 years' time. That would seem to be, on the surface, an extremely ambitious target.
It is an ambitious target, but I also think it's necessary that the leading companies not only introduce bold targets, but also the steps to get there. There is a lot of announcement fatigue, almost sustainability announcement Ponzi schemes out there, where companies make huge commitments and then when they don't meet them, they come up with the next bigger one. And what we are trying to do differently is we don't look only at our emissions at 2030, but really at 2021, 2022. And we also reward our leadership for achieving carbon emission reduction. And I think that's really important. If you don't add carbon reduction into your remuneration schemes, then it's much harder to get there.
Carrie, some would argue that the only way to make the aviation industry carbon neutral is for people to stop flying altogether, or at the very least fly a lot less than we were certainly used to pre-pandemic. How would BA respond to that?
We're already buying aircraft now that are up to 40% more fuel efficient than the aircraft that they replace. And we're also making sure that where we can, all of our operation is already using renewable electricity. So for example, when we plug our aircraft in on the ground at our main bases, they are plugged into renewable electricity powered by wind. And we have electric pushback tugs. So we're basically trying to minimize the emissions from our operation now. We've also made a kind of voluntary action so that on our UK domestic flights, for example, we already offset all the residual emissions after carbon pricing to make sure that they're already carbon neutral. And then in the medium to longer term, we're looking more at the technological solutions that can help aviation decarbonize. And really excitingly this year, we've actually just put in our kind of first flight of sustainable aviation fuel, which we flew a few weeks ago. And we've also made a commitment to purchase a huge volume of sustainable aviation fuel. This is fuel that is made from carbon that's essentially recycled from different wastes.
Georgina, do you hope the Games in Paris will be carbon neutral? And if so, how will you try and achieve that?
Well, let me tell you something. The Games will not be climate neutral or carbon neutral. We'll go beyond that. We're going to be climate positive, actually have a positive impact on climate. This is because we're taking the entire climate impact into account, the famous scope 3. So we are counting even the traveling of spectators into our impact. We're working very hard to reduce our emissions. So we're aiming for less than half of emissions than previous games, which is a massive effort, as you can imagine. And then all those unavoidable emissions, we're going to offset, and we're going to offset more than our emissions. So this is why we say that we are committed and we have the means to deliver a climate positive games, which is what the IOC is asking other countries to, other cities, to do from 2030 onwards. So we'll be 6 years behind in advance.
Still to come here on the agenda. After record-breaking temperatures, we hear how Greece is beating the heat. And pricing the planet. How much will it cost to curb climate change? Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
And welcome back to the agenda. The summer of 2021 was the hottest on record, a troubling sign perhaps, as global temperatures continue to increase faster than experts had predicted. In an effort to beat the heat, Athens decided to hire Europe's first ever chief heat officer. And I asked her how she plans to keep Greece cool.
It's a vicious circle what air conditionings do, because they blow hot air out into the public sector while they cool the indoors. So it's a very, what's it called?
A double-edged sword.
A double-edged sword. And we know that in about the 1.6 billion air-conditioned units that are working today around the world are burning the same amount of energy as the whole continent of Africa for all of its energy uses. So you're right, it absolutely, it's one of the most energy spending appliances that we have in our home, and it also heats the outdoors. So it's not a solution. The solution is that we start building our buildings differently. We have been talking a lot about energy upgrades, but we have to start really doing heat upgrading our buildings, like making them much more resilient to heat.
Economically, this is a potential problem to try and stop global warming and prevent extreme temperatures and extreme weather conditions. How strong or well equipped is the Greek economy to deal with these measures and make the necessary changes?
Stephen, it has never been a priority. All these issues are issues of priority and how you cleverly figure out ways to move to the future. What is your vision of your country in the future? And then you can align the budgets and your policies to actually work for that. We haven't done this at all. This summer has really been a wake-up call for our politicians, who have for the first time started really taking it a little more seriously.
More than 1.7 million people were affected by severe flooding in China's northern Shaanxi province in October after torrential rain triggered landslides and led to thousands of homes collapsing across more than 70 districts and cities. I spoke to Wu Changhua, China and Asia Director at the office of Jeremy Rifkin, to ask how China plans to fight the floods of the future.
for every 1 degree Celsius temperature rise, the air sucks up 7% more precipitation or water into the atmosphere. So then when the conditions actually come together, you suddenly have this downpour somewhere, right? And depending on the air flows, you know, the meteorological conditions, stuff like that.
And what impact does that have on agriculture?
Huge, actually. When there's too much water, as you know, China experienced, particularly this summer and also into this fall, and the flooding literally submerge and wipe out the crops or harvest for a year. And then, of course, there will be other regions that experience extremely droughts, right? So basically no water. And so that's going to dramatically impacting actually harvest as well. That's why if you look, you know, some parts of the world, for instance, Africa, has been experiencing a famine, literally, right? We're talking about the people literally do not have enough food. So disrupting tremendously the global food system there as well.
And what is China doing to prepare for events like these?
We do have data. We have more capabilities in terms of satellite monitoring and sensors, whatever. So we'll be able to tell as early as possible actually what's coming up. So that has been a major sort of step forward. Then when things happen, the government definitely has this sort of tradition, mobilizing all forces in the society, including military, to come to the rescue. But no matter what you do, actually, I think more and more evidence shows climate change is intensifying. We are talking about adaptation and resilience. Somehow, actually, it's literally overwhelming. It seems to me there's no single country at this moment, rich or poor, large and small, is really, really ready to say, yeah, I'm proof. I'm climate crisis proof. There's no single country that can do that.
What's the price of saving the planet? A report claims the amount invested in sustainable nature-based solutions needs to triple by 2030. Well, I spoke to one of the report's authors, Justin Adams, from the World Economic Forum, who explained why.
The state is inadequate. I mean, the state is poor. We are investing 0.1% of GDP, so 1/10 of 1% of GDP, about $133 billion per year, is invested in nature, and it is dramatically lower than it needs to be, given that actually nature underpins about half of global GDP. So many sectors are highly or mostly dependent on a healthy planet. And yet we know from climate change, from ecological collapse, our environmental indicators are in decline. And yet we are investing this 1/10 of 1% of global GDP into nature positive activities.
And you want to see investment in nature-based solutions tripled by, what, 2030? That's quite close. It's 9 years away. Is that feasible?
From where we're starting from, it's clearly a stretch. But I think more importantly is to think about how much money is already invested into these sectors. Our food, our agriculture, and beverage sector is about $8 trillion per year, right? So that is the economic output of that sector. And yet that sector is absolutely dependent on healthy nature. So how can we actually shift the investment that's going into that sector to actually make more nature positive outcomes? And that's what we've got to start thinking about, rather than just nature investments as somehow a separate thing. So we're talking about a tripling over that time. At the same time, every year we're investing 600 billion per year on agricultural subsidies, many of which are actually driving environmental decline. So how could we shift those as just one example of how we can get to some of this mobilization of new resource that we know is so desperately needed?
Green hydrogen is being increasingly touted as the fuel of the future. Made using renewable energy and therefore creating no CO2 emissions, its use powering transport and industry is seen as a way of helping governments around the world achieve their net zero targets. Green energy developer Frank Wouters says he believes the time to turn to hydrogen as a mainstream clean energy source has finally arrived.
There's absolutely no doubt that, hydrogen has gone through a number of cycles and perhaps There was a little bit too much enthusiasm, let's say 15 years ago. But currently what we're seeing is a number of things that come together. First of all, there's an urgent need to decarbonize our economy. So there is evidence of climate chaos is growing. People are aware of that. The global population wants leadership to move. And the other thing that we have now that we didn't have before is actually really cost-effective green electricity, which is the largest cost factor in the production cost of green hydrogen, and that we didn't have 10 years ago. So those are some of the things that are definitely going to drive the hydrogen agenda.
So give me some informed speculation. You know better than most of looking ahead. If green hydrogen is going to become the widely used fuel of the future, how soon could that happen?
I think within 10 years, we'll see that green hydrogen can actually compete on a pure cost comparison basis with alternatives. So within 10 years, it's going to be on a path to replace other forms of energy carriers in a very, very rapid way. And one of the things that I believe, and if I look at the technology, the way you make it, the way scale up will have an amplifying effect, we will see exponential growth. And that is something that we've seen with photovoltaics. Exponential growth, it surprises everybody. The human brain is not hardwired to grasp the speed with which something like this can grow. There's nothing that stands in the way of hydrogen to go through a similar development.
The electric car market is booming as prices become more affordable and drivers decide to go green. But can infrastructures keep up with what is needed to fully move away from the internal combustion engine? Well, Swedish car giant Volvo says it will be fully electric by 2030. I asked one of its executives, Bjorn Annwall, how realistic that target was.
It's perfectly achievable. We have since a long time said that by 2025, half of our cars should be fully electric, or half of the sales should be fully electric. And now we're complementing that with a hard end date of 2030. And we do that to focus our resources for a quick transformation and quick transition, which we believe is the right thing to do. Consumers want it. They expect Volvo to take a lead in planetary safety, just as we've always done when it comes to physical safety. And purely from a company strategy point of view, it's the right thing to do. Fully electric premium cars is the fastest part of the auto market, and we want to be a winner in the premium market, so we should focus on the growing part. So for us, 2030 is a hard end date, and we aim to make a transition very quickly from where we are today until that point.
Well, what would you say, or how would you describe the major challenges to reach that milestone?
There are a number of things that we as a society need to go through in order to get there. First of all, there is the affordability of fully electric cars, and primarily the battery cells need to get cheaper and the technology needs to get better for that to happen. And that will happen with focus and with scale. Then we need charging infrastructure throughout the world for this to work, powered by energy friendly, I was going to say fossil-free energy sources. And also there is going to take some time with getting consumers' behavior to change, getting consumers to understand what the driving pattern is like, how it is to charge your car, where you can do it. There's always a bit of hesitation as you change technologies and habits, and we need to overcome that as well. So I would say affordability, charging infrastructure, and just the time it takes for human behavior to adapt.
Don't forget you can watch everything from past Agenda episodes and find additional exclusive content on our website, cgtn.com/Europe, or on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @CGTN Europe. Coming up on a future Agenda, we'll be looking back on some of the most talked about news stories of 2021 and how they could shape the next 12 months in our Year in Review Agenda Special. But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.